Hating one's body is a tumultuous relationship with deep roots all the way back to childhood. In fact, I think very few, if any of us, escape childhood unscathed. I am often asked how to talk to children about their bodies and about fatness in a way that challenges and reframes dominant messages steeped in diet culture. And because I don't have children, I feel like I am not very well equipped to answer these questions. This episode features a dear friend of mine, Katrina Molson, who speaks openly and candidly about navigating these conversations with her 3-year-old child Lennox. We explore what fat-positive parenting looks like and debate how we would support a child's bodily autonomy while holding true to our own fat politics.
My name is Katrina. I'm a hair and makeup artist from Vancouver, BC. I don't really know what else to say about myself. I am fat. I have been fat my entire life, varying degrees of fat. When I started my experience of parenthood, I was super fat, bordering up towards like infinity fat, being like trying to find clothes, even online, even in specialized spaces, was like next to impossible. And just I've had sort of just fluctuations in my life. And so at this point, I would identify myself as like a mid-fat.
Mm-hmm. So I think we should probably start almost at the very beginning,
Yeah.
as far back as we can. Can you talk a little bit about your childhood or growing up as fat and that dynamic between parent and fat child?
Oh God. Okay. So not just like any parent. My mom was a model in the 80s. So
Great.
Awesome. It's like, what is it? Like the final boss of almond moms. So, so I grew up in North Vancouver. I grew up in like the most kale salad area of this kale salad city. I think I was probably one of the only fat kids in my school. There might have been there was a few others, but none of us, there was no sort of like kind of camaraderie like some of us have now.
So when you and your partner, Amin, first discussed having children,
Yeah.
I remember you were telling me of thinking about international adoption.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about that experience as a fat person? What was that like?
It was so disheartening. I'm trying really hard not to swear. It was so disheartening because there's a pretty long list of countries that, I mean, in hindsight, international adoption is super problematic. I know that now, but there is a really long list of countries that will not even consider adopting to you if you are over a certain threshold of BMI. It's like most of them. Most of the countries that are open to adopting to Canadians.
And how did you learn that? Like, did someone tell you or look at your application, or did you find out through your own research?
I'm trying to remember how I figured it out. I don't remember how I learned it the first time, but I remember knowing it. And when we did go to talk to an adoption agency, again, problematic. When we did go to talk to this adoption agency, I mentioned, I know where I learned that, XYZ countries won't adopt to me because of my weight. And they were like, yeah, that's true.
So when you were exploring that, did you do anything to try to mitigate that or be the good fatty to try to still sort of get in their good graces?
Oh, of course. But the thing is like, there's just like a wall. Like as soon as they see your weight, like they just throw your application out. So like being a good fatty, that's not going to do you any favors. I tried to be the good fatty because we ended up adopting through the ministry, or we haven't finalized yet. We're still technically fosters. But I actually realized that it kind of, like on paper, of course, it doesn't matter. They want to look out, like when they ask about your health, which is so loaded, most of it's about like your ability to care for a kid. And so you're sort of at the mercy, which I don't know if it's better or worse. You're sort of at the mercy of like the individual social worker and like their biases towards the size of your body.
So that's the rationale behind those limitations, is that someone with a higher BMI could not properly care for a child.
Like, I guess so, but ultimately I think it's like we don't want to send our kids to you because they might end up being fat too.
Right. So then there's this like tension of what we think causes fatness and then trying to avoid that as best we can.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose so.
So what has your experience been like with the ministry here in BC?
So like my experience of everybody has a different experience of the ministry, and I know like older experiences of the ministry have been absolutely terrible and like super harmful. So like I really need to acknowledge that. Our experience of it, like mine and Amin's, has been largely positive. Especially like in regards to fat phobia. Like I have felt a little bit of it at times. We have had so many different social workers that it's like every time we would get assigned a new one, like the terror would creep in again. Cause like our first social worker that we had was also fat. And like that can go one of two ways. That's either like they're on your side or they're so self-hating that they're going to take it out on you. And she was great, but we only had her for like a minute. And so like our current 2 social workers that we work with are both pretty great.
And so when they do house visits or when you have to meet with them in person, is there any specific way that you prepare for that with this sort of knowledge or background information that what you look like and the size of your body might influence or jeopardize your relationship with Lenny?
When we first brought her home, when I talk about like body size fluctuations, I was in the biggest body that I had been in my entire life. And to sort of give a gauge for that, I was wearing like a clothing size like 26, 28. I weighed about 100 pounds more than I do now. And I had just been actually, I think shortly after bringing her home, so this didn't affect the initial anything, I had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, which is like one of the biggest sort of like hits to the good fatty, because it's like, you know, the whole being like, well, I have perfect blood work, so you know, like you can shut up. And like I didn't have that to like use as a shield anymore. So I was like, great, like I've had everything that I had like going for me has been like stripped.
And did you have to disclose that, or did you have to update your application or paperwork?
No, it's so the order that everything happened with us was really kind of convoluted. A, because of COVID, and B, because we were named by Lenny's birth mom as the people that she wanted to take her kid. So the I don't want to say good thing about what's happening now, because adoption is trauma, full stop. But like one of the things that happened that was good is that they respected her choice. You know, they didn't just throw her into the system to like a random set of foster parents. They respected that they wanted the baby to come with us. So things happened pretty out of order, because like the first thing generally you do if you want to be a foster parent is also, the foster system isn't created to set up to foster to adopt. Like fostering is done with the goal of reunification.
Okay.
Right. And then adoption is adoption. So generally speaking, you go through different home studies. Like one is to be a foster parent and then one is to be an adoptive parent. But we kind of did both at the same time. And then we did it like a year after we brought her home.
Oh, wow.
Because like we were technically supposed to, like, I mean, they came and did a really rudimentary one where they like looked around our house to just sort of see if we were like, I don't know, growing weed.
There's like no
like,
knives laid out.
Yeah. And they did that, and that was like really fast and really painless. And then like a year, COVID happened, all this kind of stuff. And I want to say maybe a year later, then we had like the full scrutiny. So it's like they want to talk to your doctor. They want to talk to you about like your health habits, and they ask your weight.
Oh, wow.
And at the time I actually refused to disclose.
Good for you.
Yeah. They're like, what's your weight? And I was like, I'm a fat person. You can write that down.
Sassy.
Yeah.
Did they ask you, you know, I mean, so when, and this is not the same at all, but if you were to foster or adopt an animal, they often ask you on the application process, what do you intend to feed them? And so with children, like, do they, because of the BMI restrictions and this idea of fat people or allowing fat people to have children will mean that those kids grow up to be fat adults, do they ask you questions that support that bias and try to interrogate how you intend to raise this child?
I don't think that they're allowed to ask some of those questions now, or I bet if she chose not to, or they just weren't on the list. I mean, there were elements that felt a little bit kind of like icky. Like the one like asking what your weight is. Like, how is that relevant? Like, how is that relevant in any way? But I would do the performative fatty thing. And like when they came, I'd be like making my lunch and I would make sure that it was like the healthiest thing that quote, healthiest thing that I would eat in a week. Just so that they could see, you know? It wasn't like far off. Like I wasn't faking it, but it's like, I just made sure that like that was the moment that I was having like my like 18 grain bread that tasted like cardboard with almond butter, you know?
And now that Lenny is 3 or almost 3,
she's like 3.5.
Yeah,
now.
which is wild. I remember when Lenny was just a sweet little babe. Now that Lenny is 3.5, has that changed at all in terms of, you know, she's not a little baby anymore. They're a toddler, I guess. I don't have children. I don't know. Is 3.5 a toddler?
She's like, I think she's a preschooler now. But
that's a different term. Oh,
we still call her the Todd though. So it's like, I don't think that'll ever leave. She'll be a teenager.
So now that Lenny is the Todd, does that influence like how you talk about food around them or around the social workers that come into the house?
Yeah, I don't think it's ever come up with the social workers now. I think the amount of time that has sort of passed with COVID and how sort of like slowly that like everything's gotten done, because like our home study isn't actually fully completed yet and we're at 3.5 years and we were told that the timeline would be between 3 months and a year.
Oh my goodness.
When we brought her home. So it's been really convoluted. So like our experience is pretty unique. But yeah, as far as like food and stuff like that, it hasn't been touched on. I think they basically visit to see, I think they have a lot of pretty severe problems on their plate. So I think, I mean, depending on how fat phobic the social worker is, I don't think that that's so much of a priority. Like they come over to our house and they see that she's like happy, healthy, running around, smiling, cuddling us. Like, I think that's what they're looking for more than anything.
So what is it like being a parent to a little human being? Because I get a lot of questions from friends who either have young children or want to become parents. And they usually ask me, well, how would I talk to my kid about their body? What would, you know, fat positive parenting look like? And I'm usually like, I have no idea. That is not my wheelhouse. I've never spent that kind of time with a young person, with a child. So how do you approach parenting and what does fat positive parenting look like?
That was a thing that Amin and I talked about a lot because we both come from very fat phobic families. My kind of rule that I have really put my foot down about is we don't talk about how bodies look. We talk about how they function. And like there will come a day when she's going to start talking about how bodies look. She's going to preschool now and like kids talk about stuff. And up until this point, we've been like getting her like children's books that are like bodies are cool. A mutual friend of ours, Roz McLean, did the body book, which is really neat. Yeah, that's about it. I think for me, like a big thing is just exposing her to all different like manners of people. She's got a fat mom, you know, like her dad's fat. He doesn't need to ID as fat because he's a dude and he wears dude clothes. So, yeah, we haven't really gotten to the point where we're talking about it yet, you know, but like I have things sort of like loaded in my back pocket, you know, like if she flags someone out in public that's like bigger than me or something like that, I would just be like, yeah, we all look so different. Isn't that neat? The thing is like in our house, there's such an intense diversity already between like her dad and me and her that like already it's like clear that you've got 3 humans that are living together that all look so different that I think we kind of have it baked in. So it's sort of like, it's a hard question to answer for someone who doesn't have that sort of exposure in their daily life. It's like, bring your kids around your fat friends. I think a thing that happened that I can sort of like maybe speak to was at one point, we've got these 2 friends and they had their daughter who was probably like 5 or 6 or something. And we're close with them and this kid is amazing. And at one point we were saying goodbye. And like, I just love how kids just notice everything and it's just neutral to them until we make it not neutral. Yeah. You know? And she runs up to me to say bye and she wraps her arms around me. And then I felt her squeeze. And then she looks up at my face and she was like, I can't get my arms around you. And I was like, yeah, I'm squishy. And she was like, yeah. And her parents were like, because her parents are both thin people, right? And they were like panicking, and they were like, no. And I'm not going to name her because like I don't want to embarrass anyone. I thought it was so cute. And if I'd had like another moment to sort of react, like I had a lot of things sort of like ready to say, you know? And it would have been things like, isn't that nice? Am I not the funnest to cuddle? You know? And like things like that. But I also like, you don't know if she's going to run up to someone else and cuddle them and be like, you're really fun to cuddle, squeezing them. Because it's hard because we all interact with our bodies in different ways as fat people.
Totally. And how we're touched too, especially around our stomachs, I think is really interesting. And it's so interesting to me too to think about that visual where when you reflect, if you had access to people who were comfort objects in childhood, often they are people who are soft and squishy and warm, and I mean inherently they're larger than you usually because you're a child and they're an adult, but
like 7 pounds,
right? But then there's also that aspect of wanting to be around like a fleshy body. And I think it's so interesting that we try to facilitate that form of comfort in their bedrooms with stuffed animals, whatever, but then when it comes to our own bodies, there's this barrier that we still can't cross or even just acknowledge the ways in which our bodies might offer comfort.
Well, look at postpartum bodies. Like nature does things like this for a reason, right? Like bodies after giving birth are always bigger, even if just like while things are sort of settling back in post, you know, having to make room for carrying and gestating a baby, but also like milk production in someone who lactates, you know, like someone who hasn't necessarily maybe had like a top surgery or something like that. And so their body is producing breast milk, or chest milk, and having that softness. Postpartum bodies are soft, you know? And so you have this little human who has come out of the womb into the world and generally speaking onto a soft body for comfort. Like it's just, that's most humans' first experience of the world.
Absolutely. And we sever that comfort and that trust of bodies and what they offer us so quickly, it seems. I mean, you and I have had a lot of conversations about, because I'm part of Lenny's chosen fam, about how Lenny will be raised with as much gender neutrality as possible, but also how quickly it becomes incredibly difficult to maintain those values or that approach as soon as you step outside your house. And so with that in mind of, you know, none of us exist in a black box, and we can anticipate that the world is not built for that kind of creative gender expression and freedom. Similarly, how are you anticipating Lenny growing up? And I mean, do you have an idea of when you might expect those complications or those conversations to happen? And I know you've said that, you know, we'll talk about diverse bodies, but how do we hold space for nuance when children who live in a fatphobic society come home and feel shame about the size of their body or what someone has said to them?
Yeah, I just think about the way that I was reacted to as a kid and how it was so well-meaning, but in hindsight, it was really messed up. So like when I would come home crying because I'd been called fat, and like, it's so wild because it's like kids will find any difference and they will like come at you. Like I was a sturdy kid, you know, like if I look back in photos, I wouldn't go, oh, that's a fat child. I was just really sturdy.
We're strong Scottish lasses who would survive a famine.
Oh yeah, I was built to survive a famine and destroy villages. So like, you know.
My dad did say that to me when I was a teenager. I was having like a bad day, and he and my siblings are both very thin. And he said to me, he was like, Layla, out of all 3 of my children, you would survive a plague. What 14-year-old wants to hear that? I did not.
You're like, thanks, Dad. That makes everything better.
I was like, wow, I will officially never leave my room. Thank you so much. And I know that he meant well, right? Yeah. And now as an adult, I see the benefit even of the sturdiness of my body.
Yeah.
And yet when you're a teenager, it doesn't matter.
No.
Right?
No, what matters is like, does like the hot person at my school also think that I'm hot?
Exactly.
Yeah. But like the reaction thing, like when I came home crying about being called fat, my family, like my mom and my grandma's reaction was to help me not be fat. or to attempt to help me not be fat. So like my grandma took me to like Weight Watchers meetings, and then she would like reward me with like $20 every time I lost 10 pounds, which for like an 8-year-old is huge.
Yeah, that's like what, 20% of your body weight or whatever.
Yeah, an 8-year-old in the 90s too. Like pre-inflation, that was a lot. That was a lot of money. But like, so the reaction was to help me not be fat, as opposed to reframing like the whole thing. And so like I think about it now, and like you cannot know how you're going to react to something until you are in it. Like you just can't. But when I think about my experience and sort of try and kind of get ahead of it, like things that were profound for me, my responses to Lenny, like, you know, she's in a bigger body in some ways because she's 4 inches taller than the average 3.5-year-old. Like she's
I'm so proud.
I know, right? She's like off the charts for like growth charts for height. And she's, to me, looks very proportionate, whatever that means. But you know, kids might flag her as fat when she's older. And I think, there's a few things. Like one, it's just like the reaction from my mom and my grandma were different because they were both thin also, right? So if like Lenny comes home and is upset about being fat, first of all, I'll be like, you know, well, I'm fat. Like, do you think there's something wrong with that? And I think that one of the biggest things that I've learned in parenting is asking more questions than coming up with answers right off the bat, just to see what it means to them first. You
and
know?
let them kind of like find their own way. But I'm curious because, you know, we've talked a lot about bodily autonomy for children and what that means and what that looks like, because you'd be surprised and shocked to see just how little of it they have as tiny people.
Yeah.
So if Lenny were to come home, let's say in high school, and express a desire to lose weight, how does that then come into the conversation about bodily autonomy and our children? Yeah,
that's a really tough one. I think the problem is like when they're in high school, they're going to do what they're going to do when they're out of the house. So all I can do now is do my best to like raise her like with the values around, you know, bodies and looks and stuff, and just hope that that sticks. Because like you can only control for so much within your house. Like I have learned you cannot control anything about what a kid eats. You can't make them eat if they don't want to, you know, and vice versa. And so it's like when she's in high school, like she's going to do what she's going to do. And all I can do is be like a safe spot to land. You know, I try and talk her out of it? Absolutely, I will. I mean, I think that there would be like, I'd have you on speed dial for like intervention time, but like, yeah, I think we've all gone through the sort of self-hatred phases. And I think that there's something about going through that and kind of coming out the other side that kind of helps us to have empathy towards the people who are still in it, you know?
Totally. I mean, I think even about my like different groups of friends that I have, and the friends of mine who, for whatever reason, and regardless of their politics, still maintain any kind of dedication to the pursuit of weight loss. I think at this point in our friendship, they know better than to talk about it around me, because it would just be insensitive to talk about it around your fat friend. At the same time, I don't know that I even am equipped with the resources you need to have that conversation. Like if Lenny was a teenager right now and you had me on speed dial and you called or they called, I don't even know if I would be prepared with what to say.
That's the part about parenthood.
You're like,
you are never prepared. Like you can think that you know, and you can think that you have a plan. You're not. You're not. Right. And it's like, sorry, Layla, you're part of like the family structure now. So prepared or not, we're doing this.
It's terrifying.
I think that I'm trying to be the parent that asks more questions than tells my kids things, you know? So it's like for me, if she came to me with a problem like relating to, you know, how she's being treated for her weight, I would hope that my response would be like, well, what do you need from me right now? Like, how can I help you? What do you need from me? And if she said, I need help losing weight, I would try to ask more questions, you know? And I'd be like, well, like, why do you think losing weight will fix this, you know? And like, ultimately, if that's what she wants,
Is there a line? Like, do you think there would be a line for you where you would withdraw your support?
I think I would say to her, listen, like, if you're doing things that are good for your body, if you're eating nourishing food and you're moving your body as much as you feel like you need to, I really want you to realize that what your body does at that point is what your body wants to do, you know? And if, like, I just want to encourage her not to fight nature, because, like, for me to be a thin person, like, I never ever have been a thin person. And like, I think at one point, like those, I don't know, 10 plus years ago, the smallest my body had ever been was actually about the size that I am now. And I was fighting so hard to be there. Like I was starving myself. Like when I actually like look back at, like I was working with a nutritionist on a like healthy plan. I was powerlifting. And then when I actually sat and crunched the numbers, I was probably consuming like 1,000 to 1,200 calories a day.
Oh my goodness.
I was having to work so hard against the nature of my body to try and be in a smaller body.
And fighting nature, I think
it's like trying to box with a tornado. Like, exactly. Why are you trying to do this? Exactly. Nothing's going to happen.
Well, or a lot of harm happens.
Yeah.
We see weight cycling. We see people's metabolisms never recover. Different, vital systems never recover from the damage that occurs.
I ended up with kidney tumors. Like, they're non-cancerous, but like I have tumors in my kidneys from being on like a ketogenic diet. Mm-hmm. And I remember talking to my urologist and she's like, well, you have these angiomyolipomas, I think that they're called. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And she's like, we don't like, there's a bunch of different things that could have caused them. And it's something I looked it up and I was like, oh, I was on like keto for like 2 years.
I wonder if.
And she says that can be a big cause of things like that.
Right.
So now I have to be monitored for the rest of my life because I was working so hard to not be fat so that I could be treated well by the medical community was part of it.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder too, then, it's also kind of a common sentiment in fat community to talk about how people would rather be lots of things except for fat.
Yeah.
And to know that we cause things like that, organ failure, what have you, I wonder if that would still be celebrated. I feel like it is in our conversations.
Yeah, as long as you're not fat.
Exactly. Our conversations about weight loss surgery, for example, it's so and I really struggle with that tension between not wanting to police people's bodies and autonomy and then also having opinions about like the violence and the harm that occurs. And I don't know what I would say or do if it got really personal to the level of like my own child asking for something like that.
Yeah.
Because I have a lot of sympathy for my parents when I was begging for a gym membership. I was begging to see a nutritionist. I would be begging for these things because I so desperately wanted to be treated like a human being.
Yeah.
And, for my parents, when you see your child in so much pain, and then you also have doctors and family members saying your kid's going to XYZ, I mean, I can't fault them for then doing what they thought was best.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Also, I think about like my grandma and my mom and like obviously because like I was raised by them and like 2 different generations. And like my grandma's generation was you had to remain, I'm trying to find a way to say this without swearing, you had to be attractive in all the sort of standard conventions of beauty to men for safety. Right? And that part of that was being thin and in her words, having a tiny wee waist.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice or resources for parents or just people who have children in their life or in their community that they can turn to try to have a toolkit, I guess, for when or if these questions come up?
I feel like I want to check actually before I answer this because I feel like there is a Facebook group that I'm part of. I think a lot of sort of fat positive Facebook groups that I'm in are really, really good at sort of like answering these questions. But I don't want to like make one up that doesn't actually exist. Okay, so there's a group. It's a small group. There's 359 members, and it's called Fat Parenthood.
And is that specific to Vancouver?
No, this isn't specific to Vancouver. I mean, for Vancouver, there's Fat Club Vancouver, which is amazing. I love it. I mean, I am an admin, so I'm biased. But like, it has its problems like every group does. But that would kind of, I like the one that isn't location specific also because there's like resources from like all over the world And like, you know, I mean, this is probably predominantly North America because it's an English speaking group, but like people with like different experiences in like different areas of the world with like a different cultural lens, even like different spots in the US might have different things to say. And just kind of having all of that to take in is valuable, I think. Yeah. I just try and get as many books, and I just try and like live body neutrality as much as possible around her. And I think actually to this day, the first time I ever heard someone call her pretty, because we have like a rule about that, was a while ago, and it caught me so off guard that I was like, no, you know. And it's like, I don't want to tell people not to tell my kid that she's beautiful, but like I don't want her to grow up thinking that that's her value, because that can be taken away. It goes away when you age, you know.
It's hard because you don't want to overcorrect and then have a kid who's like, no one in my life has ever told me I'm beautiful.
Like,
because
like I'm a gargoyle.
I still want to be told that, you know, like it doesn't go away, but it's
I
especially
demand
important
to be told that
when you're a child. But I understand what you're saying too, and I think it has a lot of parallels to conversations about gender where, you know, certain words or terms are always used for AFAB children or children perceived to be feminine versus masculine.
Yeah.
And it's so obviously we want to sort of create a distance or space from that. But at the same time, we also don't want to be like, well, it doesn't exist in a dichotomy. You are all of these things.
Yeah. And I just don't want it to be like a fundamental part of her identity, you know, like, because I see the way that backfires, you know. I feel it in myself, like aside from my like reprehensible fatness, I do meet like, and I will name my privilege here, I do meet the standards of like Western society's conventional beauty. And so for me, I'm seeing in myself, like I'm staring down the barrel of 40 and I'm watching my face and my skin change. And like, I spend a lot of money on Botox trying to fight that, because I have been raised, and an integral part of my identity is having a pretty face, but like it's being beautiful. And like that also definitely affords me better treatment than other fat people who don't have that privilege.
Totally. That is totally another spinoff or like related branch to this conversation, which is when we don't have access to thin privilege, what else can we try to scramble together?
And so like Lenny also, like as a little person of color, there's that element that she's going to have to contend with. She's adopted, you know, there's a whole slew of things that I haven't had to deal with that she's going to have to deal with. So for me, it's just like I just don't want her looks to be a fundamental value, because it's something that is fleeting, and it's something that can always change. And then when that's gone, what's your value? You know? And I see how I personally am like fighting with that now that like my face is changing. I've watched my mom fighting with it, because her whole value was like how beautiful she was because she was a model, you know, and watching her trying to find her value and finding her value now in her like 60s, where like she was contending with that for a long time. So the point that I'm trying to make with Lenny is that I want her to, for her value and for her identity to be wrapped up in things that she can control, you know, and that are things that aren't wavering and aren't going to change.
And I think we should shout out the Body Book again by Roz McLean, and I'll include it in the show notes, because that is just the most beautiful book that I always give as a gift for baby showers.
I have bought so many copies of that book. The other really cool resource that comes with that book is there's actually a YouTube video and a song.
Oh, I love that.
And so like when they're too little to sort of be like absorbing the message, and like there's a point at which, you know, kids kind of go from like potato to like human being and you're like, I'm just reading you all of this stuff and it's like blah, blah, blah. I mean, it helps develop their speech and all that kind of stuff, but like they're not really taking in the imagery so much. But like kids love like moving bright colors on a screen, which I mean, whatever. I'm not going to judge myself for putting her in front of the TV, but that video is great because it's just like it's like an animated version of the book, and it grabs their attention and they hear the song. And I kind of want that to be a song that's stuck in our head. You know, there's like a lot of things like I love the shape of me, you know, and it's just it's a catchy little tune. So shout out to Roz and that whole thing, because phenomenal.
Yeah, we want the song to haunt Lenny forever.
Oh, it haunts me in the best possible way.
Is there anything you think I've missed or you'd like to add or you wanted to talk about?
Yeah. One thing is like, because like the parenting element is really important. And I think the only thing that we can give our kids is what we have, you know? And one thing that has felt like just this, it's been a very aggressive onslaught since starting parenting and trying to like have community with other moms is the amount of talk about weight and self-hatred from parents. And like, this is very like cis normative, but like women who have found themselves in larger bodies after giving birth. Or like the other day, I think I got blocked for it. It was in like a mom's group, and someone posted about how they feel so disgusting. They've gained 70 pounds. Like there's so much of this self-hatred talk, and you could tell that this person like lives their regular life in a smaller body. And they're talking about like how they only have like one t-shirt that fits them. They don't even want to leave their house. Like the amount of self-hatred that came out in this post, I was like, wow, so this is how you view fat people the rest of your life when you're not in a body that looks like mine. And I think my comment was, so what you're saying is that the worst thing in the world that you have experienced is being in a body that looks somewhat like mine. You know, I think that this needs a trigger warning for fat phobia, because this is pretty harsh and hurtful for fat people to read.
I think it's so interesting how pregnancy becomes this temporary form of fatness that people so quickly want to move away from. Aren't you a little busy, like letting your body put itself back together?
God, so busy. I cannot imagine where people find the time. But also this people are so determined to not look like your body has been through a like life-changing medical event. Like it's like trying to erase being a mom. Like you don't want, I mean, dad bods are considered sexy, but what about mom bods?
For real.
You know, like why we've made this like part of like the cultural narrative. Like I want a man with a dad bod, but you never hear the mom bod being talked about. It's always just like, oh, Gwyneth Paltrow like shed her baby weight in like 6.5 days by not eating and using an IV. Like this idea that you want to be a mom because there's this, I'm just talking about like the cultural narrative in general. There's this buy-in to like your value if you're a mom, but you can't look like one. You can't look like you've given birth. You can't look like you've given birth.
You're not supposed to feel like it.
You're not supposed to feel like it. No parts of your body are supposed to look like or feel like a human has come out of there. I mean, there's so much like just deeply entrenched misogyny and fat phobia and all of that. And yeah, the amount of like diet talk and like internalized fat phobia and like body hatred in like mom communities is just, it's vile. And if you say anything to sort of contradict that, you get dogpiled on people being like, well, she's just expressing how she feels about her body right now. And other people are like, oh, don't worry, you'll snap back eventually. Like it could be like a whole podcast, like season topic talking about the fat phobia, you know, in and around. And that, that was a really hard thing for me, finding community in motherhood where I wouldn't get like surprised, like slapped upside the face with that like every day. It's like swimming in the ocean and getting stung by a jellyfish. Like
the defensiveness too of, well, she's just talking about her body and she should be allowed to do that, is what scares me from, or makes me feel that there is this assumption that if I ever had children, would be completely militant about how we talk about certain things. And in some ways, I will fully own that I would be. Like, if something transphobic entered into my home, we would immediately deal with it. Yeah. If anything ableist, racist, what have you, I would do my best to handle it in a way that did align with my political values. And I think when we talk about, you know, talking about fatness and raising children, it does make a lot of people uncomfortable because it does seem like it's this very sort of militant approach where we can't make mistakes and there's no gray area and whatever. And
we're going to mess up all the time.
Exactly. I don't think it's going to be perfect, but I do think these are conversations that a lot of people either do not want to have and so they shy away from them, or they're very aggressive in shutting them down.
Yeah, this is interesting. Another point that you bring up, because you're talking about like racism, transphobia, all that kind of stuff coming into the house. we try really hard to get ahead of a lot of things by having like books. Like we've got a book called Anti-Racist Baby. We've got the body book. But like the body book is like the only, there's maybe like a handful of books. And like books are not the only media that kids take in, right? So it's like representation is super important because that normalizes, like kids will things will be normal for kids if you normalize them, right? And it's like they take in everything, and if it's normal for you, that is normal for them. But like I cannot find anywhere, and it was never there for me, like fat representation. So like I'm clinging to like the shreds of things that we have in my house, like again, like the body book. I need to be from like my own experience, I never talk about my body negatively.
Are there any toys of fat characters?
No, like that's
fat
the
dolls,
thing.
fat teddy bears, fat whatever.
I would love to find more, you know, but like the closest thing right now, because it's like fatness is always signified being bad. So it's like I had Ursula growing up, you know, and like, so it's like for me, it's like I feel extra pressure, but I also feel like this is my assignment and like this is my job now, and so I've accepted it, is to be that representation for Lenny. Like I have fat art all over the house. I want to make sure that she's around, like you and I at the beach in our bathing suits, just being joyful. And like, cause like my mom, when she was like 5 pounds, quote, overweight, she'd be like, now it's wild. Cause now she's so teachable. She acknowledges how that was messed up, because she never put my body down, but I'd watch her in the mirror, like grabbing her tummy skin and talking about how she was big. And I'd be like watching her and taking that all in. So like, I don't let Lenny, like I have trained myself to like look at my body in like a positive light, and I want her to see me doing that. And one day she walked in me and I was in front of the mirror and I was like, look at my belly. I was like, oh, it's so soft. I was like, do you like your belly too? And she was like, yeah. And she like pulled her shirt up, and we were both looking at our bellies in the mirror, you know? And like cause like your mom's inner monologue about her body and like outer monologue about her body, like what she says about her body is going to become yours. So it's like, even if I'm faking it sometimes, I don't care, because like I just want that to stick.
One of my friends, their first child is deaf, and so when their child was growing up, they hacked all of their toys to have cochlear implants that matched their child's. So all of the teddy bears, dolls, what have you, had these cochlear implants, including their child was really obsessed with Batman. And so they made a Batman shirt where Batman had cochlear implants on.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we could take a bunch of Lenny's toys to like Build-A-Bear and just stick the like chute up these toys
stuff them
and
bigger.
like stuff them bigger.
I think like it's funny because like I have also altered a lot of things in our house, because like, you know, like whiteness is so idealized. And like try finding, first of all, a kid's toy that is a little baby, like baby toys that is a little baby of color, and like you can find them, but they're going to be twice the price of the white one, or sold out, because it's like people need these. And we have a rule in our house that we don't need any more white representation. I am it, you know. And so like I bought her this. It's funny because like Amin laughs at me, but he supported it, because I was like, I know I'm like a trope right now, but there's this picture from IKEA of this like little girl with a bear, and she was blonde and white, and I literally went, and because I wanted it for Lenny, I brought it home and I colored it to make it look like her. Aww. Because it's like for her to grow up with that picture on her wall, that's this sort of like version, like I literally gave it her skin tone and her hair color.
I love that.
Because I think it's important. There was no space on it to make it fatter, but it is kind of a little bit of a sort of a chubby kid. But like, yeah, I just try and have stuff like that around all the time, and until those resources come, you know, until there's more stuff. And I think recently it's getting better. And like I need to seek it out and access it more, because we do have things for like anti-racism and transphobia and homophobia and stuff.
It feels like the introduction to body diversity happens in the preteen age with young adult fiction. I've seen a few books come out with these chunkier characters. I don't know that they necessarily have used the word fat, but I don't think that they don't. You know,
well, I use it enough. So
yeah, exactly. But it's interesting to think about them as little children too, and how that really needs to trickle down into a younger category.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming to chat with me, Katrina. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
It's fun to do the thing that we just like do all the time anyways, but
on camera.
yeah. Hi.
This podcast is produced and directed by me, Layla Cameron. Both audio and video versions of this podcast were edited by Ari Conrad Birch. Each interview was filmed and audio recorded by Rami McHale. Additional video was filmed and edited by Felix Naud and directed by ETW Media Productions. The music for this season is by the band Parlor Panther. Funding for this podcast is supported by TELUS STORYHIVE.